Why, Johnny Ringo, you look like somebody just walked over your grave.
In the shadowed silence of an Arizona sunset, a man steps forward. His boots press into the dust. His coat flutters in the breeze. And with one chilling drawl, he whispers the words now etched into movie history, "I'm your huckleberry." But behind that iconic moment, behind every smoky gunfight and tense stare down in Tombstone, lies a story even more dramatic than what made it onto the screen. A story of broken scripts, hidden heroes, desert fevers, cast-in fighting, and a movie that, by all logic, should have collapsed. Instead, it became a modern Western classic. Let's ride straight into the heart of Tombstone and uncover how one of Hollywood's most chaotic productions turned into one of its most unforgettable films. The secret director who saved it all. On paper, Tombstone had accredited director George P. Cosmatos. But in reality, the film was held together by the quiet leadership of Kurt Russell. As production started unraveling, the script kept changing mid-shoot, the tone veered wildly, and actors were growing increasingly confused. It was Russell who stepped in, not with arrogance, but with a calm sense of duty. He reorganized the call sheets, handpicked scenes to cut, and essentially directed the film without ever claiming credit. Even Val Kilmer, in a 2017 interview, confirmed it. Russell was the true captain of the ship, steering Tombstone through chaos. He even sought advice from Sylvester Stallone, a close friend, who told him how to survive the politics of salvaging a drowning production. And survive he did. Tombstone wouldn't exist in its current form without Kurt Russell's quiet takeover. A shoot that felt like war. Filming wasn't just difficult, it was torturous. The Arizona heat scorched the earth while the cast wore thick 1880s accurate wool costumes that trapped sweat like a furnace. Long shoot days began before sunrise and stretched deep into the night. Michael Biehn, who played Johnny Ringo, later described the experience as boot camp with cameras. Sam Elliott called it the hardest shoot of his entire career. Crew members dropped from exhaustion. Actors got sick. Some scenes were filmed while the cast was literally fighting to stay conscious. And still, the show went on, casting battles and alternate realities. Casting Tombstone was its own war. Russell wasn't the studio's first choice, not even their second. The executives doubted his voice, his look, even his mustache. They preferred bigger names, more traditional stars. But Russell fought for the role. He saw something in Wyatt Earp others missed. A man of rage hiding behind restraint, grief hidden beneath discipline. He didn't land the part by playing along. He got it by refusing to back down. The same could be said of Val Kilmer. Initially, the role of Doc Holliday was almost offered to Willem Dafoe. He had the edge, the voice, the unpredictable charisma. But studio execs feared his previous roles in Platoon and The Last Temptation of Christ might trigger controversy. So Dafoe was passed over and Kilmer stepped in, a decision that changed everything. And then there was Mickey Rourke. He was originally eyed for Johnny Ringo, but Rourke declined, opening the door for Biehn. Fans still debate whether Rourke's wild energy would have been too much or perfect. Kevin Jarre's vision, then rejection. Behind it all was screenwriter Kevin Jarre. His script was rich with historical detail, emotional nuance, and interwoven character arcs. It was heavy, serious, and dense. Too dense, according to Hollywood studios, who repeatedly turned it down. Too many characters, too long, too grim, and worst of all, the Western genre, they said, was already dead. The script sat on a shelf, abandoned. But Jarre didn't quit. He kept rewriting, rep-itching, and eventually found an independent financier willing to take the risk. Tombstone moved forward, not with studio blessings, but with grit and faith. Ironically, when the movie became a box office success, the same studios that rejected it tried to buy in, scrambling for distribution rights. But it was too late. Tombstone had already made its point, the cut that almost killed the movie. When Tombstone was first screened, audiences were left cold. The ending lacked heart. Originally, the story ended with Wyatt Earp walking into the distance. No final moment with Doc Holliday, no snowy epilogue with Josephine. Felt hollow. Producers responded quickly, greenlighting a rare and risky late-stage rewrite, something few films attempt once production is already strained. The test audiences hadn't just disliked the original ending, they felt emotionally abandoned. The original script closed with Wyatt Earp riding off alone into the dust. No final conversation with Doc Holliday, no sense of closure, just silence and open trail. The audience didn't feel inspired or moved, they felt unfinished. So the filmmakers made a bold decision. They rewrote the final act and rushed back into production, crafting new scenes that would give the story a quiet, emotional weight. One of the most vital additions was the hospital farewell between Wyatt and Document. That scene wasn't just added for sentiment, it became the emotional core of the film. Kilmer's performance in those final moments was hauntingly subtle. Doc, once full of sarcastic quips and defiant swagger, is now gaunt, resigned, and vulnerable. When he tells Wyatt to go live a normal life, it hits like a bullet. Their bond, built across battles and blood, ends not with gunfire, but with forgiveness and love. The other addition was the epilogue with Josephine in the snow. After so much dust and death, the snow offered a kind of cinematic cleansing, symbolizing a new beginning for Wyatt. That ride through white silence provided a soft grace note, a quiet suggestion that peace, however brief, was possible after so much violence. These weren't just filler scenes, they reframed the entire tone of the film. Suddenly, Tombstone wasn't just a revenge-fueled Western. It became a story about mortality, brotherhood, love, and redemption. What could have been just another stylized shootout film found its soul in the edit bay and a final rewrite. And here's the kicker. These last-minute scenes were expensive, rushed, and done on a tight schedule, but they're now considered some of the most beloved moments in the movie. Without them, Tombstone might have been remembered as gritty but hollow. With them, it became legendary. The shootout that took 4 days. The iconic shootout at the OK Corral didn't just strain the actors, it nearly broke the production. It took 4 full days, dozens of camera setups, real firearms, squibs, and split-second choreography. Some actors were bruised, props were wrecked, crew members stopped watching the monitors and started plugging their ears. But what they captured was cinematic lightning, one of the most intense, immersive gunfights in film history. The town of Tombstone fights back. Not everyone wanted this movie made. In fact, Tombstone sparked outrage in the very town that gave it its name. When word got out that Hollywood was dramatizing Wyatt Earp's story yet again, many residents of Tombstone, Arizona, felt insulted. This wasn't just about artistic interpretation, it was about legacy. Local historians were among the loudest critics, slamming the script for what they saw as gross inaccuracies. They argued that Tombstone glorified violence, simplified complex figures like the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday, and painted the town more as a theatrical backdrop than a real historical place. Museum curators went even further, calling the film too flashy and reckless with the truth. Some feared it would overshadow the real legacy of the town, turning it into a theme park version of its past. The backlash wasn't just verbal. Some citizens actually wrote letters demanding production be halted altogether. They accused the filmmakers of disrespecting the memory of real people, lawmen, outlaws, and civilians, whose lives were being stylized for box office profit. For a brief time, tensions ran so high that certain historic sites became off-limits to the crew. Local officials debated whether filming should even be allowed at specific landmarks. There's irony in that friction. The movie called Tombstone was being rejected by the town of Tombstone itself. But that conflict also reveals something deeper. The story of the American West isn't just folklore. It's a living history that still means something to the people who carry it. For those residents, Wyatt Earp wasn't just a character. He was someone's great-grandfather. Doc Holliday wasn't a catchphrase. He was a man who died young, coughing blood. Eventually, the production was allowed to continue, albeit with adjustments. Some locations were changed. Some scenes were filmed away from town. The crew did what they could to maintain peace. But the message was clear. Tombstone doesn't belong to Hollywood. It belongs to history first. And while the film would go on to become iconic, it had to wrestle with the very real people who still walk the streets where legends once stood. The crew pressed on. But for a while, tension simmered. Background shots had to be relocated. Permits were threatened. The message was clear. Hollywood didn't own Tombstone, history did. Doc Holliday, acting or possession? Val Kilmer didn't just play Doc Holliday, he became him. On and off camera, Kilmer slurred his speech, kept his shoulders hunched, and walked like a man in pain. He stayed in character between takes, during lunch, and even in offset interactions. Kilmer didn't break once. To portray Holliday's tuberculosis, he trained his breathing to mimic lung constriction. He collapsed his posture. He studied 19th-century medical journals to understand the disease. He wasn't just playing a role. He was showing what it meant to die slowly, with style. That coin twirl you see in the film? Kilmer brought it from his own repertoire. He'd used it in Top Gun and Real Genius. It wasn't in the script. It was just him. The duel that was almost real. The quiet standoff between Doc and Ringo is one of the most chilling scenes in the movie. No words, just silence and death hanging in the air. But what audiences didn't know is that Michael Biehn was about to faint during filming. He wore layers of wool in 50 degrees Celsius desert heat. Dehydrated and dizzy, he began to lose his footing. That faraway look in Ringo's eyes, that wasn't acting. That was survival, and they kept it in the film. Dana Delaney's quiet rebellion. The role of Josephine Marcus didn't go to a typical Hollywood starlet. Dana Delaney wasn't the studio's top pick, but she read the character differently. Not as a damsel, but as a woman with grit, defiance, and her own sense of power. In her audition, she didn't lean into seduction. She leaned into stillness, independence, and confidence. It wasn't what the producers pictured, but it was exactly what the film needed. Josephine didn't follow. She stood apart, and Delaney did too. A film stitched back to life. Post-production was another battle. Scenes were filmed out of order. Some emotional arcs were missing. Editors came and went, frustrated, confused. One famously described the process as stitching a movie back to life. But slowly, out of the chaos, a story emerged. Themes began to sync. Moments started to matter. The film found its rhythm, not through perfection, but through raw persistence. The score that was written in a panic. Bruce Broughton wasn't the original composer. He was brought in at the last minute, no prep time, no themes. Just raw footage and 4 weeks to build a score that would define the movie's soul. Movie's soul. Most composers get months. Broughton had days, but he delivered. His score carried the tension of gunfights and the tenderness of deathbeds. It's now considered one of the best Western soundtracks of the 90s. The Earp family was even bigger. The film focuses on the legendary trio of Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan. But history tells a broader, more complex story. In truth, the Earp family was massive. There were 9 siblings in total, each with their own paths, ambitions, and struggles. Their father, Nicholas Porter Earp, was a former soldier and justice of the peace who raised his sons with a stern hand and a relentless sense of duty. While the film trims the family tree for storytelling clarity, the full Earp lineage reveals an even deeper tale of legacy, hardship, and American frontier ambition. Besides the 3 brothers seen on screen, there were James, Newton, Warren, and several sisters, Martha, Virginia, and Adelia. Some siblings followed the law. Others flirted with lawlessness. James Earp, for instance, had fought in the Civil War and later ran a saloon. Newton and Warren dabbled in mining, gambling, and even bounty hunting. Their lives weren't as glamorous or well-documented as Wyatt's, but their existence paints a fuller picture of the Earp clan, a family stretched across states, bound by blood but shaped by vastly different choices. Condensing the family in the film wasn't just about runtime, it was about focus. Director Kurt Russell and the production team made a conscious decision to narrow the story to its most emotionally gripping relationships. By spotlighting Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, the film could explore themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and the emotional toll of violence without losing viewers in a sprawling family web. The result was tighter storytelling, but it also came at the cost of historical depth. Yet knowing the full scope adds new appreciation for what Tombstone achieved. The brothers we do see are no longer just isolated heroes. They're part of a larger American story, one of migration, survival, family tension, and personal myth-making. The Earp name wasn't built by 3 men alone. It was forged across generations, through triumph and tragedy, by a family that helped shape the legend of the Wild West. So while the film gave us a sharpened portrait, the real Earp family was a wide canvas of grit, and grit again. True pioneers in every rugged sense of the word. The real Wyatt Earp didn't flinch. One of the most unbelievable scenes in the movie, Wyatt walking through gunfire, untouched and shooting Curly Bill with one clean shot. is actually based on real historical accounts. According to Cowboy Johnny Barnes, Earp charged into a creek, bullets flying, shot Curly Bill dead, and walked away unharmed. Truth, in this case, may be even more cinematic than fiction. Final words that still echo. In the film, Doc Holliday dies in a quiet, almost poetic moment. But the truth is stranger. The real Doc Holliday, lying in a Colorado hotel, looked down at his bare feet and muttered, "This is funny." He always believed he'd die with his boots on. Instead, death came quietly, and he laughed in its face. When Tombstone hit theaters, it went up against Kevin Costner's Wyatt Earp, a big-budget epic filled with historical accuracy and prestige. Costner's film faded fast. Tombstone caught fire. Its lines were quoted, his characters mythologized. Even hardcore Western fans embraced it. It was a film that had to fight for every frame, every dollar, every minute. But in the end, it became the definitive Wyatt Earp story, not through polish, but through soul. Tombstone wasn't just a movie. It was a near miracle, a film that bled behind the camera and nearly collapsed under its own weight. But because of uncredited heroes, late-night edits, and actors who gave more than they were asked, it survived. And it didn't just survive, it thrived. It left us with a legacy of grit, grace, and gunfire. And just like Doc Holliday's final words, it still makes us smile. If Tombstone means something to you, if you ever quoted, "I'm your huckleberry," or held your breath during that duel, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe for more legendary stories from behind the camera. And tell us in the comments, what moment from Tombstone still stays with you? Because legends don't die, they just reload.